It is October 23rd, 2024, and all eyes are on the Middle East right now after we had documents leaked here in the US coming from the US intelligence community, specifically referring to Israel's the plan to attack Iran. Those documents also notably confirm the existence of Israel's nuclear weapons program. And in order to talk about all of that, I wanted to talk to an expert in the fields. We were able to do just that. But just a quick note before we get into the interview, just a reminder that I do have a new episode of Sanctioned, my exclusive series for paid subscribers that is out today. In this episode, we are doing a deep dive on Israel's current siege in northern Gaza. The fact that it didn't just start in the last 3 weeks. We are seeing Israel in a position where it is working overtime to ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip of Palestinians. We saw a year ago that they were ordering Palestinians to leave the northern half of the Gaza Strip. Their attempt has been to clear it of people altogether, and that attempt hasn't worked in the last year. So now they're specifically targeting the remaining 400,000 Palestinians with a new stay and starve order, in which they are literally looking to starve out nearly 500,000 people from this area by cutting off all food, water, and medicine. In this week's episode of Sanctioned, we took a look at where things stand now, how we got to this point, and of course, how Netanyahu is looking to proceed on the road to greater Israel. You can find that episode if you are a paid subscriber over on my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. You can also find it for paid subscribers on my Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. Thank you so much to all of you who have already signed up as paid subscribers and already are joining the community over there. Your support truly means the world. And now let's get back to today's interview over here on the free feed. We talked about the latest when it comes to the Middle East. We also talked a little bit about the situation in Ukraine when it comes to U.S. support for Kiev and the question of how long that is going to continue, as well as where things stand for the media here in the U.S. I know I've talked a lot about the fact that we've seen the kind of official end of Russian media funding here in the U.S. as we know it. And so we took a look at the impact of that here in our media world, especially with the upcoming election. We discussed all that and more earlier. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is John Kiriakou, an author, journalist, and former CIA officer and whistleblower. John, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Oh, thanks very much, Rachel.
Now, I want to get your take on the latest on a few different topics, but I want to start off with these leaked documents coming from U.S. intelligence. You've got the U.S. saying it's now investigating after highly classified documents were leaked and published on Telegram that appeared to show the Pentagon's analysis of Israel's plan to attack Iran as presented to Washington's Five Eyes allies. Now, the files also notably included the acknowledgement that Israel has nuclear weapons, which both the US and Israel won't say publicly. So how do you view this? I mean, yes, we all knew that Israel was planning to attack Iran, that attack's supposed to be coming at some point, but how significant were these files and the fact that they were leaked?
This is extraordinarily important for a couple of reasons. First of all, every country, every belligerent in this situation has what they call off-the-shelf plans, right? So there is always the skeleton of a plan for an attack, whether it's against Iran or Iraq, or the Israelis have it for Lebanon and Yemen and Iran, and everybody has at least the shell of an operational military plan. But to have what the United States is apparently calling the plan, the actual plan, and it's presenting to Five Eyes is incredibly important. What makes it even more important is this apparent acknowledgement that the Israelis have a nuclear bomb. Now, we all know that the Israelis have a nuclear bomb. We've known since the 1980s. But this is one of those things that the United States has never publicly acknowledged, and certainly Israel has never publicly acknowledged it. In fact, there was an Israeli whistleblower in the 1990s who went public with the fact that Israel has a bomb. And served most of the rest of his life in an Israeli penitentiary. So this is dramatic. I just, as an aside, Rachel, I have a friend who, a former CIA officer, a former Pentagon, senior Pentagon civilian official, who wrote a book in retirement about Israel, and he made one fleeting reference to Israel, and he wrote Israel's nuclear program. Those were the only 3 words. And when he sent the book to the CIA's Publications Review Board, those were the only words that were redacted. Israel's
Wow.
nuclear program. So now the cat's out of the bag, and that makes this a very big deal.
Yeah,
I'll add one more thing if you don't mind.
sure.
Most of the information that we see come out in these leaks is classified at the secret level. This, because it's nuclear in nature, would be classified at the top secret level. So legally, the leak would have to be defined as something causing what they call grave damage to the national security. Not ours in this case, but Israel's. Grave damage. That's how important this is.
Wow, that is interesting, and I appreciate you breaking it down and really kind of explaining that, because I look at this and the first thing I think is not, is the Israeli government really scrambling right now? The first thing I think is, how is Netanyahu going to use this to his advantage? Now, we know that right now he can get away with just about whatever he wants,
Anything
it
he
seems
wants.
like,
Mhm.
on the surface. But I also wonder too, is there a chance that Netanyahu takes this and he goes, "Oh, well, you couldn't handle this information," and then he uses it to further get leverage over the US government? Or does he have so much leverage already that it doesn't even matter at this point? How do you see kind of the situation when it comes to Israel's reaction?
That's a great question. And I think it has 2 answers. So on the one hand, this has to just be infuriating for Netanyahu and really for any Israeli government official that the cat is out of the bag. So there's no upside to Israeli military secrets being leaked. On the other hand, the answer to your question is yes. This is going to allow Netanyahu to extract yet more concessions from the United States. He's going to be able to say, you couldn't even be trusted with my nuclear secrets. Now you owe me, whether you owe me, assistance in planning an alternative, a carrier battle group in the Eastern Mediterranean. Maybe you handle Yemen while we handle Iran and Lebanon, whatever it is. It's going to embolden him to ask for yet more.
Yeah, and I think that that's something the US is probably, well, scrambling on, certainly. I did think it was interesting that when it comes to those anonymous US sources that are then being quoted reacting to this, you haven't heard anyone saying, "Oh no," kind of downplaying it, being like, "Oh, those documents weren't real, right? Those were just
Oh,
drawn up." Instead, it's a thing of, "Oh yeah, we're investigating that, right? We're dealing with it on our end."
that's right.
And I'm also curious too, when it comes to Israel's plan, right? The plan to attack Iran, the fact that we've kind of had these, anonymous US officials again who have been speaking out in recent weeks saying there's going to be an attack. It's going to likely happen before election day here in the US, which is coming up in just a couple of weeks. So, how do you view how far the US is willing to let this go in terms of expanding to a full-on war with Iran? I mean, it seems like the Biden administration, right? They will allow a full-on genocide in Gaza. They will allow the killing of hundreds of civilians in Lebanon. But when it comes to war with Iran, that's been the one thing that they've been like, okay, let's be a little bit careful here. Does it seem like they're getting to that point? Is this just about waiting until getting really through the upcoming election?
That's a tough one to answer. I think in part it's about getting through the election, but Netanyahu is going to be focused almost solely on offense, right? He's got an ongoing war, genocide in Gaza. He has an ongoing war in Lebanon. We learned just yesterday that the Israelis killed the new leader of Hezbollah. We didn't even really know his name very, very well here in the United States. He had only been the head of Hezbollah for what, a week and a half, maybe. Um, but all eyes are on Iran. And the question, at least the question that's being posed in the press here in the United States is, do the Israelis hit Iranian economic targets? Because thanks to the JCPOA and the opening of trade relations between Iran and Europe under the JCPOA, the economy is actually pretty good right now. Do the Israelis hit military targets? Most likely. Or did the Israelis hit nuclear targets? Now, we know that most of the nuclear targets in Iran that are worth hitting are deep underground. Bunker buster bombs might get some of them. The Israelis don't have those bunker busters. We do. Or do the Israelis use nukes to get to them? The conventional wisdom right now, at least what's being reported in the American media, is that the Israelis are going to go after Iranian military targets. They're not going to go after the economy. They're not going to go after the nukes, and they're not going to target civilians because public opinion is already a problem for the Israelis, international public opinion. So I think that's what we should expect to see. And I think it's going to be a tough attack in that they're not going to pussyfoot around and just, launch a couple of missiles into military airport runways to make it difficult for a plane to take off. I think we're looking at a pretty heavy attack coming up.
Yeah, and especially as more time passes, right? There's more of a buildup. Now you've got these leaked documents out there. And I'm also curious too, because I know that when it comes to Iran, when they initially retaliated against Israel on the 1st of October, they had said, look, if you respond to us, we are going to keep escalating, right? This is
Yes.
going to get very bad. They put that warning out there. Ever since there's been some back and forth of, is the US had they been able to talk to Iran to kind of calm them down a little bit to get them to allow some sort of response from Israel? But
Right.
given all of the assassinations Israel has carried out since then, how do you see the position that Iran is in right now and what
Yeah.
they could do if Israel does carry out those attacks on military targets?
Yeah, this is a tough one. Everybody really, at least everybody that I know, lauded the patience that Iran showed after Ismail Haniyeh was killed in an Israeli attack in Tehran. Right? They blew up the guest house in which he was staying. He was the lead negotiator for Hamas, and this was an attack on Iranian soil, violation of Iranian sovereignty. The Iranians responded by launching drones, but they were slow drones. And the Iranians warned the Jordanians and warned the Americans and warned the British that these drones were coming. It took them 6 hours to reach Israel. And 7 got through. There was no damage. The Israeli Iron Dome shot down hundreds of them. So it was a show of force, but nothing really came of it. And everybody said, okay, the Iranians saved face. They didn't do any damage. That's going to be the end of it. It wasn't the end of it. The Israelis are provocative. They continue to be provocative against the Iranians. And so we've gotten to the point now with the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, where the Iranians had to respond. Now they did respond. It was tougher than it was with the initial drone attack. Now the Israelis are going to respond again. You're probably a little too young to remember a Bugs Bunny cartoon, but our former colleague Wilmer Leon and I were talking about this the other day, where there's this famous cartoon. It's from the 50s, and Bugs Bunny and Yosemite Sam are fighting. And one punches the other pulls out a knife, the other pulls out a gun, the other pulls out a cannon. They get to the point where the world is in between the two of them. One's on one side of the world, one's on the other, and they use nuclear weapons against each other, right? So it was this very quick worsening in the situation. That's what we're seeing right now between Israel and Iran. Okay, you killed a guy in our country. We're going to send some slow motion drones. Then the Israelis kill Hassan Nasrallah. Okay, now we're going to use missiles. Then the Israelis respond. We're going to hit your military. So what's the response from Iran going to be? It's going to have to be tougher. And one of the things that we're not hearing in the media right now is, what if the Iranians respond, but not in Israel, not on the battlefield? What happens if the Iranians blow up an Israeli embassy somewhere, or a Jewish community center or somewhere, or attack a hotel that is frequented by Jews? It's something that we haven't considered. And so, we're frankly not sure how bad this thing can get.
Yeah, that I hadn't considered that either. I mean, I think I was so focused on, okay, it's going to be the back and forth between the two of them. But yeah, it does make you wonder. And we also have the US with troops quite literally all around the world as, sitting
Right.
ducks in various places. And so a lot of concerns there. And I also wonder too, looking at this from the perspective of an American, we're going, okay, we know that for the US government, no matter which party is in office, they are going to go above and beyond for Israel. It
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
matter if Israel's carrying out an all out genocide of the Palestinians, the US will be there to support them and to make it possible. But that's not the only place in the world that the US is meddling or is sending well, I should say weapons and ammunition to, maybe not troops just yet, at least officially. They also are quite busy over in Ukraine, right? And you
Mhm.
have this situation where the US, at least under the Biden administration, they have given Ukraine so much support to the point where they're literally on the road to World War III against Russia. Now you have at least one of the candidates in the upcoming election claiming he's going to stop this war. Now, whether you believe him or not is another story, right? But how do you view the current state of US support for Ukraine and how that plays a role in really what we as a country can handle at this point? Because we have all of these different fires going on in the world that we help set and that we help make
Mhm.
bigger. And yet the US is acting like we've got everything and everything's fine.
There was an article in the Washington Post a couple of days ago saying that talk of a potential peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine is an invention of the American political system, and it is meant solely for American public opinion. And I think that's true. But the reason that I believe this conflict is almost over is because the Republican Party here in the United States has made a decision that it will not support a blank check for Ukraine. This war has been going on now for coming up on 3 years, and it's essentially a stalemate. I think what we're going to end up seeing is Congress refusing to play along any longer. I should even be more specific. Republicans in Congress refusing to play along. The conventional wisdom is that the Republicans are going to retake control of the Senate. Even if the Democrats take control of the House, uh, you can't get legislation through without agreement from both parties. And there just is not agreement on continued aid to Ukraine. If Donald Trump is elected president, forget it. The whole thing's over. Literally, it's over, overnight. Even if Kamala Harris wins, I don't think she'll be able to get continued Ukraine aid through a Republican Senate. And so I think that it's beyond time to let the diplomats do what they're paid to do and negotiate an agreement. And my guess is that that agreement is going to be exactly what the Russians had proposed in 2022, that they keep Donetsk and Luhansk. Of course, they keep Crimea, and Ukraine does not enter NATO. I don't think the Russians care if Ukraine joins the European Union, but they do not want yet another NATO country on their border. I think that's what we're going to see probably sooner rather than later.
All right, to play devil's advocate just a little bit here, because I may be a bit more cynical. I did see, and this was several weeks ago now, Mr. Mike Pompeo came out and he said, don't worry if Trump gets in office, right? He was still plenty supportive of Ukraine when he was in office. He's not Joe Biden, sure, but
Sure.
he still supported them. We'll make sure that there is someone in his ear to make sure that Ukraine still gets support from the US. Now,
Yeah.
you look at Trump, you look at what he said, you look at even his running mate, JD Vance. JD Vance has said, we need to stop giving money to Ukraine, right? We need some accountability there. So Do you think that a possible second Trump administration is bulletproof, or is there some concern about some swamp creatures still being a part of his cabinet that are able to get in his ear and say, hey, Mr. Putin, he's not giving you everything you want, or he's not taking your calls, or whatever that thing may be, that kind of talks right to Trump's ego and makes him say, okay, we'll continue on in this way? Or has he learned more than I'm giving him credit for?
Well, Donald Trump is notoriously poor at choosing people with whom to surround himself. You're right about Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo is a swamp creature here in Washington. Mike Pompeo is very much a Dick Cheney neoconservative, as was John Bolton. So Trump does have a poor track record of saying the right things when it comes to a more isolationist foreign policy, and then appointing neocons who never saw a war they didn't want to jump into with both feet. But J.D. Vance is not Mike Pence, and Mike Pompeo is not going to be Secretary of State. And Republicans on Capitol Hill are far more public now than they were 4 years ago about Ukraine. I think that Trump is going to wield far more authority on foreign policy than he wielded in his first term, because he allowed himself in the first term to be influenced by neoconservatives like John Bolton. And they're just not going to be around anymore.
Yeah, and I hope that that's the case, right? I think I look at him and I go, okay, exactly as you said. Look, you were influenced in your first term, right? You allowed this to be your cabinet. You have to learn from that, and you have to do better if you get that second shot in the White House.
That's
Now,
right.
speaking of the upcoming election, I know that one of the conversations that has been had, it was interesting. We went through Russiagate in 2016. 2020 rolled around, and all of a sudden you've literally had the US intelligence community days after the 2020 election going, no foreign interference, everything's fine, right? We figured everything out. And then come 2024, and all of a sudden you've got US intelligence officials already warning that both Russia and Iran may try to incite post-election violence. Now, this is an unclassified assessment that was released today that says released on Tuesday, that says the US intelligence community is increasingly confident that Russian actors are considering and in some cases implementing a broad range of influence efforts timed with the election. Some of these are aimed at inciting violence and calling into question the validity of democracy as a political system, regardless of who wins. This may be a new one, right? It's not just, oh, they're pro-Trump, they're pro-Biden or Harris. Now it's just our political system as a whole. How do you view these warnings and how seriously we should be taking them?
Well, I think that the warnings are probably true on the one hand, and on the other hand, I don't think we should take them seriously. And I'll tell you why. We always do this to other countries. Always. Other countries always do this to us. It's just a reality of life in the 21st century or in the 20th century. It happened all the time. I read something recently about this warning that the Russians, or that organizations connected to Russia were taking out Facebook ads in Pennsylvania. Okay, probably true. But guess what? Facebook said that they were able to trace $30 worth of ads in the state of Pennsylvania. $30. So, okay, let's say that it's true. Who cares? It's not going to amount to anything. There was a report that came out yesterday that this phony report about Tim Walz, grooming some young guy for sex or whatever. It turned out that the guy had his identity stolen and he didn't know anything about it. He's never met Tim Walz. He never studied under Tim Walz. Tim Walz was not his coach. This may have been a Russian operation. Okay, let's assume it was a Russian operation. What's the damage? There's none, because nobody cares. The mainstream media never picked up this stupid story, and the alternative media that did pick it up made it sound so stupid and so foolish that nobody took it seriously. So, this is just a reality that we live in the digital age, where there are going to be foreign intelligence actors meddling like this. And those foreign intelligence actors include the United States. We meddle like this. I'll give you one other example. I used to be the chief investigator at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee uh, when 2009 to 2012. And I went to Afghanistan to do a study on the heroin poppy crop. And I concluded that this was a serious problem because at the time, Afghanistan was producing 93% of the world's heroin. Well, then I was told, you might not want to publish this study because we want Afghanistan to produce 93% of the world's heroin because almost all of that heroin goes to Russia and Iran, and we want them to be addicted to heroin because it weakens their societies. Well, it's the same thing today, right? They want to interfere in our elections because it causes a little bit of chaos and perhaps it weakens us. That's just a reality of the way the world works today.
Yeah, and I really want to know if anyone's vote, if anyone's mind at all, or their opinion on any
Exactly.
issue has ever been changed by a Facebook ad, right? Whether it be
Exactly.
Hillary Clinton, Harris, Trump, I don't care. I want to know if you were out there, reach out to me and let me know because yeah, it's mind-boggling to think, and I know the US always tries to act like they have the upper hand, right? How dare anyone else have any sort of, whether it's Facebook ads, whether it's direct meddling or, putting out stories that may cause people to be like, oh, well, that I didn't know that about Tim Walz. And of course, that's also the concern too, is are people going to do their own research? But I guess that's also up to the people, right? If you hear a story
That's
about
it.
Tim Walz, are you taking the second step to look further into that to see what are the actual sources? Where did this come from? Is it corroborated by multiple different sources? Well, lastly, what are your concerns when it comes to the American people, where we stand, and also how complacent we have become in some ways when it comes to our news media and what we just ultimately believe if it kind of fits into our echo chamber of where our political beliefs stand?
I'm worried about that, Rachel. I don't know if you saw any of the media reports related to the demise of our former outlet, Sputnik. You and I were colleagues, of course, at Sputnik. It wasn't very widely reported, but there were a couple of radio-oriented journals that said that we had been shut down, and they celebrated the fact that we were shut down, and they criticized us. They criticized you by name, as a matter of fact, because they said that you spent some of the time in your last show talking about the so-called genocide in Palestine. So,
Yes, I did.
yeah. So my point is, we were the only ones talking about the genocide in Palestine. We were the only ones talking about human rights, and now we're gone. We're not on the air, and people can't have access to an independent voice on foreign affairs and politics or whatever else it is that we were talking about. That's not the American way. Our media today is just an echo chamber where you can tinker around the edges. There are little differences between Fox and CNN and MSNBC, I suppose, but if you want an alternative voice in America, you can't get it. I used to watch Al Jazeera every day, every single day. Not all day, but I would switch. I watch all the networks, and I include Fox and CNN and MSNBC and BBC and Al Jazeera and whatever else I could get on my provider. Well, Al Jazeera is gone. It's just gone. You can't watch it anymore. You can't watch RT anymore here in the United States. It just doesn't exist. You can watch BBC, which just echoes what you see on CNN, but that's it. If you want an alternative voice, you're out of luck. It doesn't exist. And so this is bad for America because it doesn't give both sides of every story. It doesn't help to educate or inform Americans so that Americans can make an informed decision in the voting booth or in the newspaper op-ed columns or anywhere else. We get only one side. We get the American side, the official side, and then that's it. And that makes us worse.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing is it's like if you're CNN and Fox News, you don't like how popular RT or Sputnik are becoming, instead of looking at their news and what they're putting out and going, okay, what can we do better? Right? What can we do to bring viewers back to us? They're just like, how can we shut down the opposing side? Right. Or
That's it.
not even opposing side, but how can we
No.
shut down the other voices out there, the
Mhm.
competition
And that's
that
what they
is
did.
out there? And if I have to have a final show and I'm criticized for, talking about an ongoing genocide, then I will take that because I don't
That's
think
right.
that I'm
It's
ever
a
going
badge of
to look
honor.
back exactly. I don't think I'm ever going to look back and think, "Wow, I wish I hadn't done that," or "I wish I hadn't raised awareness about the Palestinians that were being slaughtered using weapons that were made
That's
in the
right.
USA."
Let
Certainly.
me add one other thing too before we leave. The Washington Post listened to one of my shows as well, and it was a show in which we had a guest named Paul Wright, who's the founder of the Human Rights Defense Center in Florida. It's a prisoners' rights organization, and we also had the independent journalist Kevin Gastala. And on this episode of my show on Sputnik, we were talking about a crooked judge in Pennsylvania who had taken bribes to send children, juvenile defenders, to a private prison. So the private prison makes a profit when it's full, and it was kicking back some of the profit to the judge. The Washington Post listened to that episode and said the next day that I was weakening our democracy. Those were their words. I was weakening our democracy by talking about this issue on a Russian radio station. It wasn't the judge who was weakening our democracy
Mhm.
or the private prison company incarcerating children for a profit. I was the one. And
Wow.
it's like, our media, they just don't get it. They just don't get it.
Yeah, they don't even realize that it's literally what they're saying out loud, right? This is the reason that no one trusts you and that trust in the media here in the US is at an all-time low here this year, as it should be. And yet another reminder of why anyone watching this, be sure if there are any independent journalists out there, alternative media that you value, make sure that you are following them on all platforms. Because as we've seen, the big tech ones are not safe. Certainly
That's
a
right.
lot of moving parts here all around. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest. John Kiriakou, an author, journalist, and former CIA officer and whistleblower, thank you so much for your time and
Thank
insight.
you. Thank you, Rachel. I want to say also that it was such a great pleasure to work with you. You are a real news person. I wish you the very best going it alone. You deserve success.
Aw, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I hope we get to have more of these conversations. I know you have a million projects going on all at once. And so I look forward to following everything that you do.
Thank you, Rachel.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. If you want to support my work, you can also check out my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can join the community there. And as always, thank y'all so much for all of your support. I'll see you next time.